The scent of pine and frost clung to everything in the Northern Territories. Sharp, clean, unforgiving. It had a way of stripping pretense from the air, leaving only raw truth behind. I stood at the edge of the great hall, my pale blonde hair braided tightly against my skull, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. The stone walls around me seemed to pulse with ancient power, every shadow holding secrets I wasn't meant to know. This was the gathering of Pax, held once every 7 years when the moon cycle aligned with the winter solstice. Wolves from every territory came to renew alliances, settle disputes, and, though no one said it aloud, to be seen, to be chosen. The air thrummed with dominance displays and barely concealed aggression, alphas and their seconds sizing each other up with predatory precision. I didn't belong here. My pack, the Riverside Collective, was small, inconsequential. We survived on the margins, taking what scraps of territory the larger packs didn't want. I had been brought along as a formality, a body to fill space, proof that our alpha hadn't come alone. No one expected anything from me. No one ever did. My fingers found the worn cuff of my sleeve, tracing the frayed edge. It had been my mother's before she disappeared 5 years ago, walking into the forest one twilight and never returning. Some said rogues took her, others whispered about darker things. My father never spoke of it, and eventually neither did I, but I kept her clothes, her small belongings, as if holding on to fabric could hold on to memory. "Stand straight," hissed Beta Rowan, our pack's second in command, as he passed behind me. His breath smelled of mead and impatience. "You embarrass us by slouching." I straightened my spine, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The hall stretched before me, impossibly vast, filled with wolves who moved with the fluid confidence of predators who had never known doubt. The women wore their strength like jewelry, thick leather bound at their wrists, ceremonial marks painted across their collarbones. The men were broader, louder, their laughter booming off the vaulted ceiling. And then there was him. I had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Alpha King of the North, ruler of the 5 great packs. The wolf who had united territories that had been at war for generations. They said he was ruthless. They said he had killed his own father to take the throne. They said he never smiled, never showed mercy, never took a mate because no one could match his power. They said many things, but no story had prepared me for the reality of Kalen Stormborn. He sat on a raised platform at the far end of the hall, a throne carved from black oak and inlaid with silver that seemed to glow in the firelight. He wasn't the largest man present. Several alphas matched or exceeded his physical size, but presence had nothing to do with inches. The air itself bent around him. Every wolf in the room was aware of exactly where he was at all times, the way prey tracks a predator even when not looking directly at it. His hair was dark as pitch, longer than fashion dictated, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from the same stone as the walls. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that suggested violence barely restrained, and eyes, God's, his eyes, pale as winter ice, so light they were almost colorless. They swept across the gathered wolves with the dispassion of a man counting inventory. I pressed myself further into the shadows near the eastern archway, grateful for the cluster of visiting pack members who blocked direct sight lines. The last thing I needed was to draw the attention of someone like that. People like me didn't survive attention from people like him. "The tribute will begin," announced a voice that cracked through the hall like breaking ice. The tribute. My stomach dropped. It was tradition. Each pack brought forward their finest, their strongest, their most valuable members to present to the Alpha King. A show of respect, a display of resources, and, for the unmated females, a barely disguised audition to be considered for alliance marriages that would strengthen bloodlines and political ties. I watched as the Iron Ridge pack went first, their alpha presenting 3 warriors whose muscles rippled beneath ceremonial paint. Kalen observed them with clinical interest, nodded once, and dismissed them with a gesture. Next came Shadowpeak, offering 2 females whose beauty was so striking that even I couldn't look away. Tall, powerful, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what they were worth. The Alpha King's expression never changed. One by one, the packs presented their best, and one by one, he remained unmoved, his pale eyes revealing nothing, that terrible stillness radiating outward like cold from frozen ground. Then it was our turn. Beta Rowan stepped forward, his voice too loud, too eager. The Riverside Pack offers tribute to the Alpha King. He gestured, and two of our strongest hunters moved forward. Damon and Petra, both seasoned, both respected within our small hierarchy. They bowed with the proper depth, held the proper posture. Kaelin looked at them the way one might look at trees beside a road, present, but unremarkable. And, Rowan continued, and my blood turned to slush, we offer one more. No. His hand clamped around my upper arm like a vice, dragging me forward before I could think, before I could breathe, before I could disappear into the stone itself. The crowd parted, and suddenly there was nothing between me and that throne but empty space and my thundering heart. I stumbled, caught myself, forced my legs to move. Each step echoed in the sudden quiet. Had the hall always been this silent? Had the distance always been this vast? My pale hair, braided so tightly it pulled at my scalp, felt like a beacon. My simple dress, clean but threadbare, dark blue wool that had been mended twice at the hem, marked me as clearly as a brand. Unimportant, poor, insignificant. 20 feet away, 15, 10. I could feel his eyes on me now, that pale, terrible gaze tracking my approach. My hands trembled. I clasped them together, willing steadiness that wouldn't come. 5 feet from the throne, I dropped into the bow I'd practiced a dozen times that morning, head lowered, neck exposed in the ultimate show of submission. The stone floor was cold against my palms. Silence stretched like pulled wire. Then, cutting through it like a blade through silk, look at me. His voice was lower than I'd imagined, textured with something I couldn't name. Not cruel, exactly, not kind either. Simply absolute, the voice of someone who had never once been disobeyed. I raised my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat as my eyes met his. The world contracted to that single point of contact. His pale eyes widened, just a fraction, just for a heartbeat. But I saw it. Something shifted behind that winter gaze. Some emotion flickering too fast to name. Recognition? Impossible. We'd never met. I would have remembered. Anyone would have remembered him. Your name. Not a question. A command. Senna. My voice came out steadier than I'd hoped, though barely above a whisper. Senna Ashwood. Alpha King. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the arms of that black throne, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The firelight caught the silver embedded in the wood, throwing dancing shadows across his face, making him look less like a man and more like something that predated men entirely. Ashwood, he repeated, as if tasting the syllables. Riverside Pack. Yes, Alpha King. His eyes never left mine. The hall had disappeared. The hundreds of watching wolves, the crackling fires, the weight of tradition and hierarchy, all of it faded into insignificance. There was only him, only those pale eyes searching my face for something I couldn't begin to guess. Tell me, Senna Ashwood, he said, his voice dropping lower, intimate despite the public setting. What do you fear most? The question struck me like a physical blow. No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever cared. My mother's voice echoed from memory. Truth is the only currency that matters in the end. Little one. Spend it wisely. Being forgotten, I heard myself say, the words escaping before I could trap them. Disappearing without leaving a mark, mattering to no one. Something, pain, understanding, flickered across his features, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But his next words confirmed I hadn't. Then you and I have more in common than you know. He stood, and the movement sent a ripple through the entire assembly. Wolves shifted, straightened, every predatory instinct suddenly alert. The Alpha King descended from his throne with liquid grace, each step measured, purposeful. He was taller than I'd realized, broad through the shoulders but lean, built for speed and endurance rather than brute strength. He stopped directly before me, close enough that I could see the faint silver scars tracing his knuckles, the slight asymmetry of his left eyebrow where an old wound had healed poorly. Close enough that his scent washed over me. Winter pine, wood smoke, and something darker, muskier, undeniably male. Stand, he commanded softly. I rose on unsteady legs, my eyes level with the hollow of his throat. Even in my boots, the top of my head barely reached his shoulder. His hand moved, and I forced myself not to flinch, not to step back, not to show the terror singing through my veins. But he didn't strike. Instead, his fingers, calloused, scarred, lethal, touched my jaw with impossible gentleness, tilting my face upward until I had no choice but to meet his eyes again. "I won't hurt you," he said, and the words carried such weight, such gravity, that they felt like a vow carved into the very foundation of the world. The hall erupted. The chaos that followed his declaration felt distant, muffled, as if I were underwater, and the world above had fractured into incomprehensible noise. Wolves were shouting, some in outrage, others in disbelief. I caught fragments. "Can't be serious. Nothing but an omega from nowhere." Insult to every pack, but Kalen's hand remained steady against my jaw, his thumb resting just below my cheekbone. And in that touch was an anchor I desperately needed. His pale eyes held mine with an intensity that made breathing difficult, made thinking impossible. "The gathering is concluded," he announced, his voice cutting through the pandemonium without rising in volume. Command lived in every syllable. "Return to your lodgings. We convene again at dawn." He released me then, and the sudden absence of his touch left me swaying. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he turned to Beta Rowan, who stood frozen 3 paces back, his face cycling through shock, calculation, and barely concealed triumph. "Your omega will remain here," Kalen said flatly. "Make the necessary arrangements." "Of course, Alpha King, of course." Rowan's words tumbled over themselves in his eagerness. I could practically see his mind working, tallying the political advantages of having a pack member, even one as lowly as me, catch the Alpha King's attention. "An honor beyond measure, we are grateful." "You may go." The dismissal was absolute. Rowan bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched his knees, then scurried backward into the crowd. I watched him disappear, watched the other wolves file out in clusters, their voices rising again once they passed beyond the Great Hall's threshold, watched as my entire world tilted on an axis I hadn't known existed until 10 minutes ago. Within moments, the vast space had emptied, leaving only a handful of guards positioned at strategic points along the walls. Kalen's personal security, I assumed, from the way they moved with coordinated precision. And 2 women who approached from a side entrance I hadn't noticed before. The first was older, perhaps 50, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that had witnessed too much to be surprised by anything. She wore practical clothing, leather pants, a thick wool tunic, but carried herself with quiet authority. The second was younger, maybe 5 years my senior, with copper-bright hair and a face full of freckles that made her seem approachable despite the warrior's build evident beneath her clothes. "Senna Ashwood," Kalen said, gesturing toward the women. "This is Mira, my head of household, and her daughter Orin. They'll see to your needs." I found my voice, though it emerged shakier than I wanted. "My needs, Alpha King." His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture softened fractionally. "You're exhausted, underfed, and in shock. Those seem like needs worth addressing." He wasn't wrong. My legs felt like water, and the adrenaline that had sustained me through the tribute was rapidly draining away, leaving only trembling fatigue in its wake. But accepting help, accepting anything from him, felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would you? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. There were dozens of stronger wolves, more beautiful, from better packs." "Strength is common," he interrupted, his pale eyes holding mine. "Beauty is common. What you showed me when you answered my question, that honesty, that vulnerability in a room full of predators, that is rare." He paused, then added quietly, "That is everything." Before I could process those words, before I could ask what he meant, or what he wanted, or what fresh nightmare I'd stumbled into, he turned and strode toward a corridor that led deeper into the fortress. His guards fell into formation around him, and within seconds, he'd disappeared from sight, leaving me alone with Mira and Orin. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Well," Mira said finally, her voice warm despite her fierce appearance, "that was certainly dramatic. Come on, girl. Let's get some food in you before you collapse." The room they brought me to was larger than the entire cabin I'd shared with my father back in Riverside Territory. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled with furs and blankets that looked impossibly soft. A fireplace crackled with fresh logs, throwing golden light across stone walls hung with tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons. A copper tub sat near the fire, already steaming with heated water that smelled of lavender and something else, something clean and sharp that reminded me of mountain springs. "Sit," Oren commanded, pointing to a chair near a small table laden with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a pitcher of what looked like mulled wine. "Eat first, then bathe." Mother's orders. I sat because my legs gave me no choice. The moment I lowered myself into the chair, exhaustion crashed over me like a physical weight. My hands shook as I reached for the bread, tearing off a piece and forcing myself to chew slowly despite the gnawing hunger that had been my constant companion for months. Riverside had suffered a harsh summer, crops failing, game scarce, and what little we had went to the strongest members first. People like me made do with scraps. This bread was fresh, still warm, with butter that melted on my tongue like salvation. "Easy," Mira warned, settling into the chair across from me. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Small bites, slow sips. I nodded, swallowing hard, fighting the urge to shove handfuls of food into my mouth until the hollow ache in my stomach finally ceased. Oren moved around the room with practiced efficiency, laying out clean clothes on the bed, checking the water temperature, adding more wood to the fire. "You'll have questions," Mira said, pouring wine into a wooden cup and sliding it across the table. "Everyone does." "Does this happen often?" The words escaped before I could stop them. "The Alpha King choosing someone like this?" Mira and Oren exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. "No," Mira said carefully. "It doesn't happen at all. Kalen has never shown interest in taking a mate. Not in the 12 years since he claimed the throne." She leaned forward, her dark eyes searching my face. "What did you say to him? When he asked about your fear?" I repeated the exchange, watching comprehension dawn across both women's features. "Truth," Oren murmured, almost to herself. "Of course that would reach him." "What do you mean?" Mira sighed, the sound heavy with old grief. "The Alpha King lives in a world where everyone wants something from him. Power, favor, alliance, protection. Every word spoken in his presence is calculated, weighed, designed to manipulate or impress. He's surrounded by lies dressed as loyalty." She paused, then added softly, "You gave him something he hasn't had in a very long time. You gave him honesty." The wine was sweet and warming, easing some of the tension knotted in my shoulders. "But I don't understand what he wants from me." "He said he wouldn't hurt me, and he won't," Mira interrupted firmly. "Whatever else Kalen Stormborn may be, and he is many things, not all of them gentle. He does not break his word. If he vowed not to harm you, then you are safer in this fortress than you have ever been anywhere else." Oren snorted softly, though others might not feel the same way. My stomach clenched. "Others. You disrupted the entire social order tonight," Oren explained, not unkindly. "Every unmated female with political aspirations, every alpha hoping to forge an alliance through marriage, every pack that assumed their tributes would be acknowledged. You made all of them irrelevant with a single honest answer." She smiled, but it held a sharp edge. "That makes you dangerous, and people eliminate dangers. Fear, cold and familiar, slithered down my spine. Then I should leave. I should go back to my pack, forget this happened. You can't." Mira's voice was gentle but absolute. "The moment the Alpha King showed you favor, you became his, not in ownership," she added quickly, seeing my expression, but in protection. "To harm you now would be to challenge him directly. And I promise you, girl, no one is that foolish." I set down the wine, my appetite vanishing despite the hunger. This is insane. Yesterday I was nobody. Today I'm... What? What am I? "That," Mira said, rising and gesturing toward the steaming bath, "is what you'll discover in the days ahead. For tonight, you're a girl who needs rest. Come, wash off the road and the fear. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges soon enough." The hot water was a luxury I'd almost forgotten existed. I sank into the copper tub, letting the heat seep into muscles that had been tense for so long I'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. Oren had left me alone after helping me undress, and the privacy was both blessing and curse. It gave me space to think, but thinking led to spiraling, and spiraling led to panic. I won't hurt you. Why had those words, spoken by a man who could kill me without effort, felt more like a promise than a threat? Why had his touch, rough hands gentled against my jaw, sent electricity racing through my veins instead of terror? I scrubbed my skin until it was pink, washed my hair 3 times until it felt clean for the first time in weeks, and tried not to think about what morning would bring. Tried not to wonder what the Alpha King truly wanted. Tried not to remember the way his pale eyes had widened when they met mine, as if he'd seen something that startled him, moved him, changed him. When the water finally cooled, I climbed out and dried myself with towels softer than anything I'd ever owned. The clothes Oren had left were simple but well made: a loose linen shift for sleeping, thick socks, a robe of dark green wool. I dressed slowly, my body heavy with exhaustion and confusion. The bed was everything I'd imagined and more. I crawled beneath the furs, intending to stay awake, to think, to plan. But the moment my head touched the pillow, darkness rose up to claim me. I dreamed of winter forests and pale eyes watching from the shadows. I dreamed of my mother's voice saying, "Truth is the only currency that matters." I dreamed of hands against my jaw, gentle despite their capacity for violence, and a voice like breaking ice promising, "I won't hurt you." And in the dream, for the first time in 5 years, I felt almost safe. Dawn came too quickly. I woke to Oren shaking my shoulder gently. Morning light streaming through windows I hadn't noticed the night before. "Time to rise. The Alpha King has requested your presence at breakfast." My heart lurched. Breakfast? In his private dining hall, just you and him. Oren's expression was unreadable, as she moved to a wardrobe I definitely hadn't seen last night. "He wants to talk." She pulled out a dress, deep forest green, simple in design but clearly expensive, with embroidery at the collar and cuffs that caught the light. "This should fit. Wash your face, braid your hair, and try not to look terrified. Predators can smell fear." 20 minutes later, dressed and as composed as terror would allow, I followed Oren through corridors that twisted deeper into the fortress. We passed guards who nodded respectfully, servants who paused in their duties to stare, and finally stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with images of running wolves. Oren squeezed my shoulder once, a gesture of solidarity that I desperately needed, then knocked twice and pushed the door open. The room beyond was smaller than I'd expected, almost intimate, a table set for 2, windows overlooking mountains still capped with snow despite the late season, and standing with his back to me, hands clasped behind him, the Alpha King himself. He turned as I entered, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Not hunger, not predation, but something far more complex, something that looked almost like hope. "Senna," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." As if I'd had a choice, as if refusing the Alpha King was ever an option. But the words I heard myself say were, "Thank you for the invitation, Alpha King." His mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "Kaelin. When we're alone, call me Kaelin." And somehow, impossibly, that felt like the most dangerous thing he'd asked of me yet. "Kaelin," I repeated, testing the name on my tongue, feeling the weight of the intimacy he'd just granted. It felt wrong, too familiar, like touching something sacred without permission. But he nodded, seemingly satisfied, and gestured toward one of the chairs. "Please sit. You must be hungry." I was, though I hadn't realized it until he mentioned it. The table held more food than I'd seen in months. Fresh fruit glistening with morning dew, warm bread that filled the room with yeast and comfort, eggs cooked with herbs I couldn't name, strips of meat that made my mouth water. I sat carefully, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. He took the seat across from me, and for a moment we simply existed in uncomfortable silence. Morning light painted him in softer colors than the firelight had, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, his pale eyes less stark, almost gentle. He wore simple clothes, a dark tunic and pants that suggested this was private time, away from the performance of leadership. "I imagine," he said finally, reaching for bread and breaking it with those scarred hands, "you didn't sleep well." "I slept better than I expected," I admitted, accepting the portion he offered. "Your household is very kind." Mira has been with me since I was a child. She tends to mother anyone who seems lost. His expression shifted, something almost resembling amusement crossing his features. Though I suspect she gave you warnings as well as comfort. She told me people might want to hurt me, that I'd disrupted the social order. She's not wrong. He poured tea from a silver pot, the steam rising between us like smoke signals in an ancient language. What I did last night was unprecedented. Inflammatory. Some would say reckless. My hands tightened around the bread. Then why did you do it? His pale eyes met mine, and the directness of his gaze sent heat through my chest. Because the moment you answered my question, the moment you showed me that raw, unguarded truth, I knew that letting you walk away would be the greatest mistake of my life. The words hung in the air like a confession, vulnerable in ways that seemed impossible for someone like him. Alpha Kings didn't admit to need. They didn't expose weakness, yet here he sat, offering me pieces of himself as carefully as he'd offered bread. I don't understand, I whispered. You don't know me. I could be anyone, anything. You're someone who admitted her deepest fear to a room full of predators, he interrupted gently. You're someone who stood before absolute power and chose honesty over safety. Do you know how rare that is? He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him like heat from a forge. I have spent 12 years surrounded by wolves who tell me what they think I want to hear, who perform loyalty and hide daggers behind their backs, who see me as a means to an end, never as... He stopped, jaw tightening. Never as what? Never as someone who might be just as lonely as they are. The vulnerability in those words cracked something open in my chest. Here was the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, admitting to loneliness like it was a physical wound. And somehow, I understood. Being invisible and being hypervisible created the same isolation. One made you forgotten, the other made you a thing rather than a person. My mother used to say that truth was the only currency worth spending. I said softly, the memory rising unbidden. She said lies were expensive. They cost you pieces of yourself until there was nothing real left. His expression shifted, pain flickering across his features. Your mother was wise. Is she... gone. 5 years ago. She walked into the forest one evening and never came back. The words came easier than they should have, as if his honesty had opened a door I'd kept locked. No body. No closure. Just absence. I'm sorry. And he sounded it, genuinely, as if her loss mattered to him because it mattered to me. My father died 12 years ago. I killed him. The word struck like a physical blow. I set down my tea, staring at him, waiting for explanation or justification or the violence that surely lived beneath such an admission. But he just looked at me with those winter-pale eyes and continued. He was going to execute my younger brother for daring to question a command. Davith was 14, barely shifting yet, and our father decided his hesitation was disrespect worthy of death. His hands curled into fists against the table. So I challenged him, fought him before the assembled packs, killed him in ritual combat, and took the throne. Your brother, I managed. Is he alive? He leads the Shadow Peak pack now, one of my most trusted allies. Something like warmth entered his voice. He's happy, mated to a fierce female who keeps him grounded. But I see him look at me sometimes, and I know he still carries guilt for what I had to do. It wasn't his fault. I know. He knows. But guilt doesn't care about logic. He reached for his tea, took a long drink, then asked, Do I terrify you, Senna, knowing what I'm capable of? The question deserved honesty. I thought about it. Really thought. Examining the fear that had lived in my chest since the moment his eyes met mine. Yes, I admitted. But not because I think you'll hurt me. Because I don't know what you want from me, and not knowing feels dangerous. That's fair. He set down his cup, his expression growing serious. I want to know you. I want to understand what shaped someone who can stand before power and choose vulnerability. I want... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I want to see if what I felt last night, that recognition, that sense of finally finding something real, was accurate or just desperate loneliness making me see what I wanted to see. And if it was just loneliness, then we share meals, have conversations, and eventually you return to your pack with my gratitude and a substantial gift to ensure your comfort." His gaze intensified. "But if it wasn't, if what I sensed between us is real, then I'd like to see where it leads. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility." My heart hammered against my ribs. People will talk. They already are. Let them. My pack will expect things, favors, advantages. I'll handle them. And if I want to leave? If I wake up tomorrow and realize this is madness? His expression softened, and he reached across the table, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "Then you leave. I meant what I said last night, Senna. I won't hurt you. That includes holding you here against your will." I stared at his hand, scarred, dangerous, capable of such violence, and felt the magnetic pull of possibility. Of what might happen if I took it, if I allowed myself to believe that someone like him could see something valuable in someone like me. Slowly, trembling, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, gentle but firm, and the touch sent electricity racing up my arm. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving this a chance, for giving me a chance." We finished breakfast in more comfortable silence, his hand still holding mine across the table, and I tried not to think about how natural it felt. How right. The next week unfolded in a pattern that became both familiar and surreal. Mornings with Kaylin in the private dining hall, talking about everything and nothing, my childhood in Riverside, his responsibilities as Alpha King, favorite books we'd read, memories that made us laugh or wince. Afternoons exploring the fortress with Oren as my guide, learning the layout, meeting staff members who ranged from welcoming to suspicious. Evenings in my room, processing everything with Mira, who seemed to understand my confusion without judgment. But always, there were the others. I saw them in corridors, visiting wolves who had remained after the gathering, ostensibly to handle political matters, but really to observe, to assess, to judge. They watched me with eyes that ranged from curious to hostile, whispering behind hands when I passed, falling silent when I approached. The worst was Nadia of Iron Ridge. She was everything I wasn't. Tall, powerful, strikingly beautiful with midnight hair and eyes like amber fire. She'd been among those presented during the tribute, and the way she looked at me made it clear she'd expected Kaylin's attention to fall on her, not some insignificant Omega from a nothing pack. Our first direct encounter came 6 days after the gathering. I was in the library, a massive room filled with more books than I'd known existed, when she entered with 2 of her packmates, both females who moved with the coordinated grace of warriors. They didn't notice me at first, tucked as I was in a corner with a volume about northern folklore. "Can't possibly last," Nadia was saying, her voice carrying in the quiet space. "He's indulging a curiosity, nothing more. Once he realizes she has nothing to offer, no strength, no connections, no useful skills, he'll tire of her." "She seems nice enough," one of the others ventured carefully. Nadia laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. "Nice? Yes, I suppose mice are nice too, right before they're devoured by wolves. She doesn't belong here, and deep down, she knows it." She pulled a book from a shelf, examined it, replaced it. "I give it another week before she runs home with her tail between her legs." I should have stayed silent, should have remained hidden in my corner, invisible as always. But something in her casual cruelty, the assumption that I would simply accept my place at the bottom of the hierarchy, ignited a spark I hadn't known I possessed. "You're wrong." My voice emerged steady, clear, as I stood from my corner and faced her. All 3 wolves turned, surprise flickering across their faces before Nadia's expression settled into cold amusement. "Well, the mouse has a voice." "I'm not a mouse." I moved closer, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite every instinct screaming to submit, to lower my gaze, to know my place. "And I'm not going anywhere." Brave words from someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real challenge. Nadia's smile was all teeth. "Tell me, little Omega, what exactly do you offer the Alpha King that any of us couldn't provide 10 times better?" The answer came to me with crystal clarity, wrapped in my mother's wisdom. Truth. I offer him truth. Not performance, not calculation, not political maneuvering, just honesty. I held her gaze, refusing to flinch, and apparently, that's valuable enough. For a moment, genuine anger flashed in her amber eyes, hot and dangerous. Her companions shifted, muscles tensing, and I realized I might have pushed too far, provoked something I couldn't handle. Then a voice from the doorway, low and commanding. "Is there a problem here?" Kalen stood in the entrance, his expression neutral, but his pale eyes tracking every detail of the scene. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? Nadia's entire demeanor shifted, aggression melting into practiced charm. "No problem, Alpha King. Just having a conversation with your guest." "Senna is not a guest." His voice held an edge that made all 3 Iron Ridge wolves tense. "She is under my personal protection, which means any disrespect shown to her is disrespect shown to me. Am I making myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, Alpha King." Nadia bowed, the gesture technically correct, but lacking any real respect. "We were just leaving." She swept past him with her companions, but not before shooting me a look that promised this wasn't over. The library door closed behind them with a solid thud. Silence settled like snow. "You heard everything," I said quietly, not quite a question. "Enough." He moved into the room, his expression unreadable. "You stood up to her. That was brave. Or stupid. Sometimes those are the same thing." He stopped a few feet away, studying me with that intensity that made breathing difficult. "But you didn't lie or exaggerate. You simply told her the truth, that honesty has value. I'm proud of you." The words sent warmth flooding through my chest. "She's right, I don't belong here. I don't have the strength or the connections or... You have something far more important." He closed the distance between us, his hands cupping my face with that same impossible gentleness. "You have courage. Not the courage of warriors who train for battle, but the courage of someone who keeps getting up no matter how many times the world knocks them down. That's the strength that matters, Senna. That's the strength I need." His thumbs traced my cheekbones, and my eyes fluttered closed at the sensation. "Why?" I whispered. "Why do you need that?" "Because I'm tired," he admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Tired of performing, of maintaining this image of invincibility. Tired of being alone in rooms full of people. And when I look at you, when I talk to you, I don't feel tired. I feel awake, present, real." I opened my eyes, finding his face inches from mine, close enough to count the silver scars tracing his jaw. "I'm scared," I confessed. "Scared this is temporary. Scared I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. Scared of wanting something I can't keep." "Then we'll be scared together." His forehead touched mine, and the simple intimacy of the gesture stole my breath. "No promises I can't keep, no expectations beyond what we build together. Just this. Us. Whatever this becomes." "What if it becomes nothing?" His lips quirked into something almost like a smile. "Then we'll have had these moments, and that's more than most people ever get." Standing there in that library, his hands cradling my face like I was something precious, I made a choice. The same choice I'd made when I answered his question honestly in the Great Hall. The same choice I made every morning when I walked to breakfast instead of running. The choice to be brave, even when fear screamed at me to hide. I rose on my toes and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, nothing like the passionate embraces described in the romance books I'd secretly read as a girl, but it was real. Achingly, terrifyingly real. His lips were warm against mine, gentle despite the power coiled in every line of his body. For a heartbeat, he remained still, as if surprised. Then his hands slid from my face to my hair, fingers tangling in the blonde strands I'd left loose that morning. He deepened the kiss slowly, carefully, as if I were something fragile he feared breaking. I felt the restraint in him, the leash strength, the conscious choice to be tender when everything about him suggested violence. My hands found his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath my palms, proof that he was as affected as I was. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, his eyes had darkened to slate gray, the pale winter color eclipsed by something warmer, hungrier. "Senna," he breathed, my name a prayer and a question. "I'm still scared," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But I'm tired of letting fear make all my choices." His smile was real this time, transforming his face from stern to beautiful. "Good. Because I have something to show you, and it requires bravery. He led me through corridors I hadn't explored, down stone stairways that seemed to descend into the mountain itself. The air grew cooler, damper, carrying scents of earth and minerals. Torches flickered in iron sconces, throwing shadows that danced like living things. "Where are we going?" I asked, though I followed without hesitation. Somehow in the span of a week, I'd come to trust him in ways that should have terrified me. "Somewhere I've never brought anyone," he replied, his hand warm around mine. "Somewhere that matters." We emerged into a cavern that stole my breath. Natural hot springs steamed in pools carved by centuries of water flow, the stone surrounding them veined with minerals that glittered like captured starlight. Moss grew in patches where moisture collected, impossibly green against gray rock. The ceilings soared high above, dotted with openings that let in shafts of afternoon light, turning the steam into golden hazes. "It's beautiful," I whispered, the words inadequate. "My mother brought me here when I was young," Kalen said softly, his gaze distant with memory, "before my father discovered it and forbade her from leaving the residential wings. She said this place was magic, that the water held the memory of every wolf who'd ever sought peace in its warmth." He turned to me, vulnerability clear in his expression. "I come here when the weight of the crown becomes too much, when I need to remember that I'm more than the sum of my duties." I understood what he was offering. Not just a beautiful place, but a piece of himself, a secret kept from everyone else. The trust implicit in that gesture made my chest ache. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand, "for sharing this with me." We sat at the edge of one pool, removing our boots and letting our feet dangle in water that was perfectly, impossibly warm. For a while we didn't speak, just existed in comfortable silence, watching steam rise and listening to the gentle sound of water trickling through stone channels. "Tell me about your mother," he said eventually. "Not just that she disappeared, but who she was, what she taught you." So I did. I told him about her laugh, bright and unexpected, that could fill a room with joy, about the way she'd hum while weaving, creating patterns that told stories without words. About her insistence that I learn to read, even when my father said it was frivolous for an Omega. About her gentle hands and her fierce heart, and the way she'd look at the forest sometimes, as if hearing music no one else could perceive. "She sounds remarkable," Kalen said when I finished, my voice thick with unshed tears. "She was. I think—" I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I think she knew she was going to leave. Those last few weeks, she kept giving me things, her favorite shawl, the book of poetry she loved, advice I didn't understand then but makes sense now, like she was preparing me. For what? To survive without her, to be brave when everything inside me wanted to hide." I wiped at my eyes, frustrated by the emotion. I failed at that for a long time. Became invisible instead of courageous. His arm came around my shoulders, pulling me against his side. "You're not invisible now." "No," I agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Now I'm terrifyingly visible. I keep waiting for someone to realize it's a mistake, that I don't belong." "Stop." His voice was firm but not harsh. "That voice in your head telling you that you're not enough. It's lying. It's been lying to you for so long you believe it. But that doesn't make it true." I tilted my head back to look at him. "How do you silence it? That voice?" "I don't." His smile was rueful. "Mine tells me I'm a monster wearing a crown. That I'll never be anything but the wolf who killed his father, who rules through fear rather than respect. But I've learned to question it, to look for evidence instead of accepting it as fact. And what does the evidence show? That I'm trying. That my people are safer and more prosperous than they've ever been. That the packs haven't gone to war in 12 years, since I unified them." He paused, then added quietly, "And that a brave, honest woman chose to kiss me in a library, which suggests I might be capable of something other than violence." I laughed, despite the tears still clinging to my lashes. "That's pretty compelling evidence." "I thought so." We stayed in the cavern until the light shifted, turning from gold to amber as evening approached. We talked about everything, his brother David and the guilt they both carried, my father and the distance between us since my mother left, the dreams we'd had as children before reality taught us to dream smaller. He told me about the politics of holding 5 packs together, the constant balancing act between justice and mercy, strength and compassion. I told him about the books I'd read, the stories I'd imagined, the secret hope that someday my life would feel like more than just surviving. "It can be," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "If you want it to be, if you choose it." "I'm choosing," I whispered. "It terrifies me, but I'm choosing." His kiss was less tentative this time, deeper, carrying promise and heat that made my toes curl in the warm water. When we finally pulled apart, both flushed and breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and said, "I need to tell you something about what happens next." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "The other packs leave tomorrow. The gathering is officially over, and they'll return to their territories." He pulled back slightly, his pale eyes serious. "But there's a tradition. Before they go, I'm expected to announce any significant decisions. Alliances, appointments, mate bonds." Mate bonds. The words felt heavy on my tongue. "I want to announce our intention to bond," he said carefully. "Not the bond itself. That's private, sacred. Something we do when we're both ready. But the intention. The commitment to pursue this, to see where it leads without interference from others. And if I say no, then I respect that, and you remain under my protection without any formal claim. But Senna," he cupped my face, his thumb tracing my jaw, "the moment I don't formally claim interest in you, you become available in the eyes of pack politics. Nadia wasn't the only one watching you these past days. Others will see you as an opportunity to gain favor with me, to create alliances, to manipulate." Fear spiked through me. "So it's an illusion of choice. Be claimed or be vulnerable." "No." His voice was firm. "It's a choice between one path and another, both with consequences. I won't lie and tell you that refusing won't have repercussions, but I also won't force you into something you don't want." He searched my face, desperate for me to understand. "I need you to choose this freely, Senna. Not because you're scared of the alternative, but because you want it." I thought about the past week, the conversations over breakfast, the easy silences, the way his face softened when he looked at me, the kiss in the library that had felt like coming home, the trust he'd shown by bringing me here, to his secret place. The way my heart raced whenever he was near, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. "I want it," I said, and meant it. "I want to see where this leads, with you." The relief that washed over his features was profound, as if he'd been bracing for rejection despite everything. "Thank you," he breathed, pulling me close. "Thank you for trusting me." We stayed wrapped in each other until full dark descended, until Mira's voice called down from the entrance above, informing us that dinner was ready and the household was starting to worry. We climbed back up, fingers intertwined, and I tried not to think about tomorrow's announcement, about the attention it would bring, about all the ways this could still fall apart. But that night, as I lay in my too large bed with its impossibly soft furs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope. Morning arrived with chaos. I woke to Oren shaking my shoulder urgently. "Get up. Something's happened." I bolted upright, heart racing. "What? What's wrong?" Nadia and her pack left in the night. Oren's expression was grim as she helped me dress in a gown of deep burgundy, far finer than anything I'd worn before. But before they went, she made accusations. Formal ones, before witnesses. My hands shook as Oren laced the dress. "Accusations about what? About you. She claims you used trickery to ensnare the Alpha King's attention. That you're not what you seem. That your pack sent you as some kind of spy or manipulator." Oren met my eyes in the mirror. "It's nonsense, obviously. But she invoked the right of challenge." The blood drained from my face. "Challenge? She's demanding proof of your worth before the Alpha King can make any formal announcement. Proof through trial." Trial. The word tasted like ash. What kind of trial? The traditional kind. Mira's voice came from the doorway, her expression apologetic and angry. 3 tests to prove character, strength, and loyalty. Kalen is furious. He's trying to find a legal way to refuse without appearing weak or biased. But pack law is clear. If a formal challenge is made before witnesses, it must be answered. I forced myself to breathe through the panic clawing up my throat. When? Today. Before the packs depart. Mira moved closer, gripping my shoulders. "Listen to me, girl. These tests aren't designed to be impossible, but They're not easy either. They're meant to expose weakness, to prove someone isn't worthy of their position. I'm not worthy, I heard myself say, the old patterns rising like floodwater. She's right. I'm nothing. I'm nobody. Stop. Oren's voice cracked like a whip. That's exactly what she wants you to think. That's exactly how she wins, by making you believe you've already lost. Mira's hands tightened on my shoulders. You are brave, Senna Ashwood. You stood before the Alpha King and told him the truth. You stood up to Nadia in the library. You survived 5 years after losing your mother and didn't break. That's not nothing. That's everything. I wanted to believe her, wanted to silence the voice in my head insisting this was a mistake, that I should run, should hide, should accept my place at the bottom where at least I was safe from falling further. But then I thought about Kaylin's words in the cavern. The evidence shows I'm trying. What did my evidence show? That I'd survived, that I'd chosen honesty over safety, that I'd kissed a man who could destroy me and trusted him not to, that I was still standing, still fighting, still here. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell me about the tests. Tell me how to survive this. Mira's smile was fierce and proud. That's my girl. Now listen carefully. The great hall had been transformed. Circles marked with white powder covered the stone floor, and the visiting packs lined the walls, creating an audience that felt more like a jury. The air thrummed with anticipation and barely concealed hostility. Kaylin stood near his throne, radiating cold fury. His pale eyes tracked me as I entered, and in them I saw apology, rage, and something that looked like fear, not for himself, for me. Nadia stood in the center circle, armor replacing the elegant dresses she'd worn before, her amber eyes gleaming with satisfaction. 2 other wolves flanked her, witnesses and judges apparently, selected from neutral packs. Senna Ashwood, one of the judges announced, his voice carrying through the hall. You have been formally challenged under pack law. Do you accept these trials, or do you forfeit all claim to the Alpha King's favor? Every eye in the room fixed on me. I felt their judgment, their skepticism, their eagerness to see me fail, felt the weight of expectation, and the crushing certainty that I didn't belong here, would never belong here. Then I met Kaylin's eyes across the distance. I won't hurt you, he'd promised. I'm choosing, I'd told him. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice clear and strong. I accept. The hall erupted into motion. Nadia's smile was all teeth and triumph, but I didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't run. The first test was announced, endurance. And despite everything, despite the fear singing through my veins, I stepped forward into the circle and prepared to prove that invisible didn't mean powerless, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply refuse to disappear. The first test was deceptively simple. Hold a fighting stance for as long as physically possible while 3 wolves circled, using their dominance to pressure submission. I had never been strong. My body was built for speed and stealth, not power. But I understood endurance in ways these warriors couldn't. I'd endured years of invisibility, of hunger, of loss. What was physical discomfort compared to that? The stance they required was brutal. A half-crouch, arms extended, back straight. Within minutes, my thighs screamed. Within 10, my entire body shook with effort. The circling wolves, including Nadia, pushed their dominance at me in waves, the psychic pressure of their alpha energy demanding I submit, that I kneel, that I acknowledge their superiority. You're nothing, the pressure whispered. You don't belong. Give up. It would be so easy to give up. Sweat dripped into my eyes. My muscles felt like they were tearing. The watching crowd blurred at the edges of my vision. But I thought about my mother walking into those trees, choosing her path despite knowing she wouldn't return. I thought about Kaylin's scarred hands gentle against my face. I thought about every moment I'd made myself small, invisible, forgettable, and how I'd promised myself, standing in that library, that I was done shrinking. 20 minutes passed. 30. My body stopped sending pain signals and moved into a strange, distant numbness. The wolves circling me grew frustrated, their dominance pushing harder. But I'd learned long ago how to disappear inside myself, how to find a quiet place where external pressure couldn't reach. At 45 minutes, Nadia called halt, her expression tight with barely concealed anger. I collapsed the moment permission was granted, my legs giving out, hands slamming into stone. But I'd held. I'd endured. Mira was there instantly, helping me to my feet, pressing water into my hands. "Well done," she whispered fiercely. "One down." The second test was announced, Wisdom. They brought me 3 scrolls, each containing a hypothetical scenario involving pack politics, moral dilemmas, and impossible choices. I had to propose solutions that demonstrated both strategic thinking and ethical consideration. The first scenario involved a dispute between 2 packs over hunting territory, where both had legitimate claims and both would suffer if they didn't reach agreement. I suggested a rotation system based on seasonal game migration patterns, with a neutral third-party monitoring compliance. The second was darker, a pack member accused of harming another, with evidence that was compelling but not conclusive. Execute based on probability, or risk a dangerous wolf remaining free. I proposed a period of supervised restriction while investigation continued, protecting the community without condemning someone potentially innocent. The third scenario made my stomach turn. A choice between saving a pack leader or 3 common wolves in a crisis situation, with only enough time to choose one option. The hall was silent as I stared at the scroll, feeling the weight of the question. This wasn't hypothetical. This was asking what I valued more: hierarchy or equality, power or compassion. I thought about my mother's teachings, about truth being the only currency worth spending. "I choose the 3 common wolves," I said clearly. Leadership demands sacrifice. That's what makes someone worthy of leading, the willingness to be last, not first. If the pack leader wouldn't make the same choice, they don't deserve the position. Gasps rippled through the watching wolves. Several nodded thoughtfully, others looked scandalized. Nadia's expression was unreadable. The judges conferred in low voices, then announced, "The answer demonstrates both strategic thinking and moral courage. Test 2. Passed." Relief flooded through me, but there was no time to savor it. The third test was revealed, and my blood turned to ice. Combat. Not to the death. Pack law forbade that in formal challenges. But to submission. First blood, or until one fighter yielded. Against Nadia herself. No. Kalen's voice cut through the hall like breaking ice. He moved forward, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. "This is not traditional. The third test is loyalty, not combat." "Loyalty is proven through willingness to defend," Nadia countered smoothly. "To protect what matters, even against superior force. If she yields without fighting, she proves she lacks the courage to stand beside an alpha king. If she fights and shows spirit, she proves her loyalty." Her smile was sharp. Unless the alpha king believes his chosen can't survive even a controlled match. The trap was elegant. If Kalen intervened, he suggested I was too weak to protect myself, too fragile to exist in this world. If he didn't, I faced a trained warrior with 10 times my combat experience. I caught his eye across the distance and shook my head slightly. "Trust me," I tried to convey. "Let me do this." His jaw clenched, muscles jumping beneath skin, but he stepped back. The trust in that gesture, the faith that I knew what I was doing, gave me strength I hadn't known I possessed. Nadia and I faced each other in the center circle. She was taller, broader, clearly stronger. Every advantage belonged to her. The smart move would be to yield immediately, to accept defeat, and walk away with dignity intact. But I'd spent my whole life making the smart move, making myself small, accepting defeat before fighting began. I thought about everything I'd survived. Every loss, every grief, every moment of hunger and fear and crushing loneliness. Thought about standing before the Alpha King and choosing honesty, about kissing him in a library, about enduring 45 minutes of psychic pressure because giving up wasn't an option anymore. "Begin," the judge announced. Nadia came at me fast, expecting quick victory. Her first strike was a feint toward my face that I barely dodged, her second a sweep toward my legs that I jumped, her third a grab for my arm that would have ended the match immediately. But I'd spent years being invisible, and invisible wolves learn to read intention before action, to see the shift of weight, the tensing of muscles, the microsecond of preparation before movement. I couldn't match her strength, but I could be faster. I ducked under her next grab, rolled past her leg sweep, used her momentum against her when she overextended. It wasn't elegant or skillful. It was pure survival instinct, the desperate scrambling of prey refusing to be caught. "Stand still," she snarled, frustration bleeding into her voice. But standing still meant losing, and I'd lost enough. She caught me eventually. Of course she did. Her hand clamped around my wrist like iron, yanking me forward, her other hand drawing back for a strike that would end this. I did the only thing I could think of. I stopped fighting her pull, and instead lunged toward her, using her own strength to propel me forward, inside her guard where her longer reach became a disadvantage. My forehead cracked against her nose, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make her reflexively release me, stumbling back with a curse. Blood trickled from her nostril. First blood. The hall exploded into noise, shouts, gasps, roars of approval and outrage mixing into incomprehensible chaos. I stood in the center of the circle, shaking, bleeding from a split lip I hadn't noticed receiving, staring at Nadia with as much shock as she stared at me. Match concluded. The judge called over the noise. First blood to Senna Ashwood. All 3 tests. Passed. The words didn't feel real. None of this felt real. Then Kalen was there, lifting me off my feet, his arms around me like iron bands, his face buried in my hair. "You're insane," he breathed, somewhere between laughter and terror. "Brilliant and insane and mine. Gods, you're mine." "I'm mine," I corrected, wrapping my arms around his neck. "But I'm choosing you too." His kiss was fierce, claiming, full of relief and pride, and something that felt dangerously close to love. The watching wolves erupted again. Some cheering, others protesting, most simply stunned into noise. When we finally broke apart, he kept me cradled against his chest, turning to face the assembled packs. His voice, when he spoke, carried the absolute authority of the Alpha King. "Let it be known to all territories, Senna Ashwood has proven her worth 3 times over. Her courage, her wisdom, her loyalty are beyond question. I claim her as my intended mate, and any who challenge this claim challenge me directly." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice I recognized. "I support this claim." Davith Stormborn, Kalen's brother, stepped forward from where he'd been standing with the Shadow Peak pack. He was younger than Kalen, his features softer, but his eyes carrying the same intensity. Beside him, a striking woman with storm-gray eyes and warrior's braids nodded her agreement. "As do we," called another voice, an alpha from the Western Territories. One by one, voices rose in support. Not all. Nadia and her Iron Ridge wolves remained conspicuously silent, as did a handful of others. But enough. More than enough to make the claim legitimate, binding, real. Kalen set me down gently, his hand finding mine, fingers intertwining. "Thank you," he said softly. "Just for me. For fighting. For staying. For choosing this." "Thank you for letting me," I replied, then added with a tired smile, "though I'd really like to sit down now before I collapse." His laugh was genuine, warm, the sound of ice breaking after a long winter. 3 months later, the morning of the bonding ceremony dawned clear and cold, the kind of perfect winter day that made the whole world feel sharp-edged and new. I stood before a mirror in chambers that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat, wearing a dress that Mira and Oren had spent weeks creating. Deep green silk embroidered with silver wolves running through forests of thread. My pale blonde hair hung loose down my back, woven through with winter flowers that Davith's mate, Serena, had gathered from the mountain slopes. She'd arrived 2 weeks ago to help with preparations, and we'd become fast friends, bonding over the surreal experience of loving men who carried the weight of leadership like others carried breathing. "Nervous?" Mira asked, adjusting the dress's shoulders with expert hands. "Terrified," I admitted, but the good kind of terrified. The kind that means something matters. "That's wisdom," she said approvingly. "You've grown so much, girl. Your mother would be proud." The mention of my mother still ached, but the pain had dulled to something manageable. I'd started writing letters to her, unsent, unread, but necessary, telling her about everything that had happened, about the woman I was becoming. Kalen said it helped to speak to those we'd lost, even if they couldn't answer. That grief needed expression to heal. He would know. He'd spent 12 years carrying guilt for his father's death, and only recently, through long conversations in our secret cavern, had begun to forgive himself, to understand that choosing the lesser violence didn't make you a monster. It made you someone willing to pay the cost of protection. A knock at the door announced his brother. David entered with his characteristic easy smile, though his eyes held the same intensity as Kaelin's. Ready to officially join this chaotic family? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, accepting the arm he offered. He would walk me to the ceremony, a role traditionally held by the bride's father, but my father had declined to attend. Too far to travel, he'd written, though we both knew the truth. He'd never forgiven me for leaving Riverside, for reaching above my station, for becoming someone he didn't recognize. It hurt less than I'd expected. Some relationships couldn't be saved, and accepting that was its own kind of freedom. We walked through corridors I knew by heart now, past guards who nodded respectfully, past servants who smiled with genuine warmth. The fortress had become home in ways I'd never imagined possible. I had friends here. Oren taught me to fight properly. Serena and I studied healing herbs together. Even some of the visiting pack members had warmed to me after watching me hold my own in that 3-part trial. Nadia had left the next day and never returned. Rumor said she'd mated with an alpha from the Southern Territories, someone powerful enough to soothe her wounded pride. I hoped she found happiness. I hoped she found someone who saw her as more than a trophy or tool. Everyone deserved that. The great hall had been transformed. Winter flowers cascaded from the walls, white and silver and pale blue, catching the light like captured snow. Wolves from all 5 packs filled the space, dressed in ceremonial clothes, their faces ranging from curious to supportive, to carefully neutral. And at the center, waiting before an altar carved with ancient symbols, stood Kaelin. He wore black and silver, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, those pale eyes tracking my approach with an intensity that made my breath catch. He looked like something from legends, beautiful and dangerous and impossibly real. When I reached him, David placed my hand in his brother's with a quiet, "Take care of her, or I'll challenge you myself." Kaelin's smile was slight but genuine. Noted. The ceremony itself was traditional, overseen by an elder from the oldest pack, words spoken in the ancient language that predated modern territories. We exchanged vows to protect, to honor, to stand beside each other through whatever came, to be honest, even when truth was difficult, to choose each other, again and again through all the seasons of life. When the elder asked for objections, the hall remained silent. When he announced us bonded, the hall erupted into celebration. And when Kaelin kissed me, right there before everyone, I felt something slot into place deep in my chest, a sense of belonging I'd been searching for since my mother disappeared into those trees 5 years ago. "Hello, my queen," he murmured against my lips, and the title that should have terrified me felt right. "Hello, my king," I replied, and meant it. 1 year later, I stood in the council room, reviewing reports from all 5 territories, making notes on resource distribution and dispute resolutions. Being queen was nothing like I'd imagined. It was harder, more complex, requiring constant diplomacy and strategic thinking. But it was also deeply satisfying, using the wisdom I'd discovered I possessed to help wolves who'd once dismissed me as worthless. Oren entered without knocking, her usual custom. The Western Border Patrol just returned. There's been another sighting. My stomach tightened. For months now, there had been reports of a lone wolf moving through the territories, female, blonde, never staying long enough to be caught or questioned. Some said she was feral, others suggested she was a ghost. But I knew better. "Where?" I asked quietly. "Near the old Riverside territory, close to the place where—" Oren stopped, reading my expression. "You think it's her. I know it's her." I set down the reports, mind racing. "Send word to Kaelin. Tell him I need to go, and why. He won't like it. He'll understand." And he did, though he insisted on accompanying me with a small guard. 2 days later, we rode into the forests I'd grown up exploring, following trails I'd memorized as a child. The air smelled of pine and memories, sharp and bittersweet. We found her near a stream, drinking with the cautious alertness of wild things. She looked older, thinner. Her blonde hair, so like mine, streaked with gray and tangled with leaves. But her eyes, when they met mine, were the same. Clear. Present. Knowing. "Mama," I breathed, dismounting before Kaelin could stop me. She didn't run, didn't speak. just watched as I approached slowly, hands raised to show I meant no threat. "It's me," I said softly. "It's Senna. I've been looking for you. My voice broke. "I've been lost without you." She tilted her head, considering, then finally, "Not lost. Found." Her voice was rusty from disuse, but unmistakably hers. "You found yourself. That's what I hoped. Why did you leave? Why couldn't you stay?" "Because staying meant dying slowly. Becoming invisible." She stepped closer, and I saw the old scars on her arms, the evidence of a life that had demanded too much. "I couldn't teach you to be brave if I remained a coward myself. Couldn't show you how to choose truth if I kept living a lie." Tears streamed down my face. "I needed you. You needed to discover you didn't need me, that you were strong enough alone." She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched my cheek. "Look at you. Queen. Warrior. Everything I hoped you'd become." "Come back," I pleaded. "Come home. There's room in the fortress. You could—" "No." Her smile was sad but certain. "This is my path, darling. The forest, the wildness, the freedom. But knowing you're safe, you're loved, you're living the life you deserve, that's enough. That's everything." We stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, two wolves who'd both chosen different forms of bravery. Then she pressed something into my hand, a small carved stone, smooth from years of handling, etched with the symbol for truth. "Keep choosing honestly," she whispered. "Keep choosing courage. Keep choosing love, even when fear says to hide." Then she was gone, disappearing into the trees like smoke, like memory, like the wild thing she'd always been beneath the surface. I stood there crying, feeling Kalen's arms come around me from behind, his steady presence an anchor in grief's storm. But underneath the sadness was something else. Understanding. Acceptance. The knowledge that some people couldn't be held, could only be loved from a distance, and that was okay. 5 years later, the nursery was painted with scenes from old stories, wolves running beneath stars, forests holding secrets, mountains touching clouds. I rocked the cradle gently, watching my daughter's chest rise and fall in the peaceful rhythm of infant sleep. She had her father's dark hair, but my pale eyes, a perfect blending of night and winter. We'd named her Vera, after the ancient word for truth, a reminder of the values we hoped to teach her. Kalen entered quietly, having finished the evening's council meeting. He moved to my side, wrapping an arm around my waist, gazing down at our sleeping child with the same wonder he'd shown since her birth 2 months ago. "How was the council?" I asked softly. "Productive." David suggested a new alliance structure with the Eastern Pax. "Serena's pregnant again. They're hoping for a girl this time." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "And there was a messenger from Riverside. Your father. He's asking to meet his granddaughter." My breath caught. 5 years of silence, and now this. "What do you think?" "I think," he said carefully, "that people can change. That sometimes they need to see the evidence of their mistakes before they can acknowledge them. But I also think you get to decide, Senna. It's your forgiveness to give or withhold." I thought about it, watching Vera's tiny fist curl and uncurl in sleep. Thought about my mother in those woods, choosing freedom over conformity. Thought about the scared girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. Invite him, I decided, but on our terms. Here, where I'm strong. Where he can see what I've built. "As you wish, my queen." The title still made me smile, even after 5 years. I'd been crowned officially in a ceremony that rivaled our bonding, had learned to command rooms full of dominant wolves, had proven again and again that strength came in forms beyond physical power. I'd survived assassination attempts by wolves who thought I was a weakness in Kalen's armor, only to discover I could be just as ruthless when protecting what mattered. I'd written treatises on pack law that were being studied in all territories. I'd mediated disputes that had seemed impossible to resolve. I'd established schools for Omegas and low-ranking wolves, teaching them that invisible didn't mean powerless. I'd become someone my younger self wouldn't have recognized, but the core remained the same. The girl who'd chosen honesty in a room full of predators, who'd stood before absolute power, and showed vulnerability instead of strength. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Kalen quietly. "Choosing me? An Omega with no connections, no political value, nothing to offer but truth?" He turned me to face him, his pale eyes holding mine with that same intensity that had stolen my breath 5 years ago. "Every day," he said, and my heart stuttered before he continued. "I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that you spent years thinking you were invisible, worthless, forgettable." His hand cupped my face with impossible gentleness. "You are the best decision I've ever made, Senna. The only thing I've done that I know, absolutely, was right." I kissed him then, pouring 5 years of love and trust and hard-won peace into the gesture. When we pulled apart, Vera made a small sound, stirring, but not waking. "She's going to be brave," I whispered, looking down at our daughter. "We'll teach her that vulnerability is strength, that truth matters more than power, that being small doesn't mean being weak. She'll be brave because she has you as a mother," Kalen agreed, his arm tightening around my waist. "And when she's old enough, we'll tell her the story of how her mother stood before the Alpha King and changed everything with a single honest answer." "That's a good story," I said, leaning into his warmth. "It's the best story," he corrected, "because it's true." And standing there in that nursery, surrounded by love I'd chosen and earned, I finally understood what my mother had been trying to teach me all those years ago. Truth was the only currency worth spending. Not because it was easy, but because it was the foundation on which everything real was built. I'd spent years being invisible, forgettable, nothing. But I'd discovered that sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was simply refuse to disappear. Was to stand in the light and say, "Here I am, flawed and frightened and human, but here, present, real," and somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. Outside the window, snow began to fall. The first of the season, soft and clean and full of promise. Winter was coming, as it always did. But I'd learned that winter wasn't just an ending. Sometimes, winter was where the most beautiful stories